Rain hammered the forgotten village like fingers drumming on a coffin lid. In the darkness, children huddled beneath a leaking roof, trading whispers that made their eyes grow wide with wonder and fear. "They say there's a library," one boy murmured, his voice barely cutting through the storm. "It appears only when a moon is full, glowing like a ghost in the woods." The other children laughed nervously, but one girl stayed silent. Her name was Leora, an orphan with hollow cheeks and eyes that burned with a hunger no food could satisfy. She loved stories more than anything, though she owned nothing but tattered scraps of paper rescued from trash heaps. Stories are lies, the village headman had declared years ago, burning books in the square. They fill heads with useless dreams. But Leora believed differently. Stories were the only friends that never abandoned her. As the storm raged on, she walked home through puddles that reflected the lightning. Then she saw it, a torn page floating in the water, glowing with a soft golden light. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The words were strange, shifting and rearranging themselves before her eyes until they spelled something impossible. Leora. Her breath caught. How did a page know her name? Leora lived in a tiny attic room above the village bakery. The baker's wife, a bitter woman named Marta, let her stay in exchange for endless chores, scrubbing floors, hauling water, kneading dough until her small hands ached. That night, Leora climbed the creaking stairs to her room, the glowing page tucked carefully inside her worn dress. Her attic was bare except for a thin blanket, a cracked mirror, and a wooden box filled with her treasures, scraps of stories she had collected over the years. Pages torn from discarded books, fragments of poems written on wrapping paper, even a single illustration of a dragon she had found blowing through the market. By candlelight, she read and reread these pieces, imagining the worlds they came from. "Still wasting your time with those silly papers?" Marta's voice cut through the silence as she appeared at the door. "No wonder you're worthless. Stories won't put food in your belly or a roof over your head." Leora said nothing, only lowered her eyes. When Marta left, she pulled out the glowing page again. It pulsed softly in her hands, warm like a living heartbeat. And though she could not explain why, she felt less alone. Village headman Dren sat in his large stone house, staring out the window at the rain. He was a tall man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. He had wealth, land, and the respect born from fear. But something gnawed at him constantly, a deep, bitter envy of things he could not control. Knowledge, imagination, the power of words. Years ago, when he had seized control of the village council, Dren ordered all books burned. Superstition and fantasy, he called them. They make people question authority. But the truth was darker. Dren feared what he could not understand, and stories reminded people of worlds beyond his grasp. That evening, he watched through his window as Leora hurried past, clutching something to her chest. His eyes narrowed. The orphan girl again, always scavenging for scraps of writing. "Foolish child," he muttered. But beneath his contempt lay something uglier, a jealousy of her ability to find joy in things he could never comprehend. He hated that she possessed something intangible, something his wealth could not buy. And so, without knowing it yet, Dren had already become dangerous. Because a man who fears knowledge will always seek to destroy what he cannot own. The next morning, Dren issued a new decree. All writings of a superstitious nature must be surrendered immediately and burned, the town crier announced. Anyone found hiding such materials will be punished. Panic rippled through the village. The few families who still owned old story collections brought them reluctantly to the square, where Dren stood beside a blazing fire pit. Leora watched from the shadows, her heart breaking as beautiful books were tossed into the flames. Pages curled and blackened, words disappearing into ash and smoke. That night, alone in her attic, Leora stared at the glowing page. She knew she should destroy it before Marta discovered it and reported her. Hands trembling, she held it over a candle flame. The edge touched the fire, and nothing happened. The page did not burn. Instead, it grew brighter, warmer, and words began to appear across its surface in shimmering gold ink. At midnight, when the moon is full, follow the wind. Leora's breath caught. The page was alive. It was speaking to her. She pressed it against her chest and whispered into the darkness. I will follow. I promise. Outside her window, storm clouds parted, revealing the pale curve of a rising moon. Midnight arrived with a silence, so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Leora lay awake, the glowing page clutched in her hands, watching moonlight spill through her tiny window. Then she felt it, a breeze, soft and silvery, brushing against her face though all the windows were closed. It whispered her name. Leora, Leora. She rose, pulled on her thin cloak, and crept down the stairs, careful not to wake Marta. The village streets were empty, bathed in pale moonlight that turned everything ghostly and strange. The breeze grew stronger, tugging at her cloak, guiding her forward. She followed it past darkened houses, past the burnt remains of the book pyre, toward the edge of the village where the woods began. No one went into those woods. They were said to be cursed, filled with shadows that swallowed travelers whole. But the wind pulled her on, gentle yet insistent. And then, between two ancient oak trees, she saw it. A door. Not an ordinary door, but one made of glass that glowed with soft, moonlit radiance. It stood alone, attached to nothing, floating in the air like a vision from a dream. Words were carved above it in flowing script, the Midnight Library. Leora's heart thundered. The rumors were true. The library existed. Leora's hand trembled as she reached for the glass door. The moment her fingers touched it, the surface rippled like water, and the door swung open silently. Warm light spilled out, golden and inviting. She stepped inside and gasped. The library was vast, impossibly larger than the door that led to it. Shelves stretched upward into darkness, towering so high she could not see where they ended. But the strangest thing was that the shelves seemed alive. They expanded and contracted slowly, like lungs breathing. Books of every size and color filled them, leather-bound, cloth-covered, some with pages that glowed, others that hummed softly like sleeping bees. The air smelled of rain, old paper, and something else, ink fresh and alive. And it was warm here, so warm after the cold rain outside. At the center of the room stood a tall figure draped in flowing robes that shimmered between silver and shadow. The figure's face was obscured, but its voice was clear and ancient. Welcome, Leora. Only the chosen may read here. The library knows those who seek truth, not power. Leora's voice came out as a whisper. Who are you? The figure tilted its head. I'm a keeper of stories, and you have been called. Leora walked deeper into the library, her bare feet silent on the smooth stone floor. All around her, books whispered, not with words she could understand, but with feelings. Some hummed with joy, others with sorrow, a few with warning. Then, from high on a distant shelf, one book began to glow brighter than all the rest. It pulsed with golden light, growing more intense with each beat, as if it had a heart. Without warning, the book launched itself from the shelf and flew through the air, pages fluttering like wings. Leora gasped and raised her hands instinctively to protect herself. But the book landed gently in her palms, warm and vibrating with energy. The cover was plain, bound in soft leather the color of sunrise, with no title or markings. She looked at the keeper. Why did it choose me? The keeper's voice was solemn. You did not choose the book, child. The book chose you, because it saw something in your soul that needs to be read. Leora's hand shook as she opened the cover. The first page was blank, smooth, and white as fresh snow. But as she stared at it, an image began to form. Her own reflection, staring back at her from paper. Then words appeared beneath the image, written in elegant script. Every story begins with a truth you've denied. Leora's heart raced as more words began to fill the page, writing themselves in real time, as if an invisible hand guided the pen. The story was about a girl much like her, alone and poor, who lived in a village that had forgotten how to dream. But this girl had a gift. When she spoke words aloud, they became real. If she said light, a flame would appear. If she said hope, flowers would bloom in the darkest places. Leora read aloud without thinking, her voice soft and tentative. The girl walked through the village square, and everywhere her feet touched, the ground bloomed with color. The moment the words left her lips, something extraordinary happened. The stone floor beneath Leora's feet shimmered, and tiny flowers, delicate and glowing, began to sprout between the cracks. She stumbled backward in shock. What is this? The keeper's voice held a note of warning now. The book you hold is no ordinary tale. It does not simply tell a story. It reveals one. Your story. Every word you read binds your heart to its consequence. The choices the girl in the story makes will reflect the choices you must make. Do you understand? Leora stared at the flowers at her feet, then back at the book. Fear and wonder warred inside her. What if I read the wrong thing? Then, the keeper said quietly, the story will end badly. Leora closed the book gently, her mind spinning with questions. The flowers that had bloomed at her feet began to fade, disappearing like mist. How do I know which choices are right? She asked, her voice small. The keeper moved closer, and though she still could not see its face, she felt its gaze, ancient, patient, and sad. The library does not give answers, child. It only gives mirrors. You will see yourself reflected in every page, every character, every choice. Some will be easy. Others will tear your heart in two. But the story will always be yours to shape. Leora looked around at the endless shelves, each holding countless tales. Are all these books like mine? Every book here is alive in its own way, the keeper replied. Some hold histories, others hold futures. Some are prisons, others are keys. But all of them demand something from their readers: truth, courage, sacrifice. Many have entered this library. Few leave unchanged, and some. The keeper paused, its voice darkening. Some never leave at all. A chill ran down Leora's spine. What do you mean? Before the keeper could answer, a sound echoed through the library, the creak of the glass door opening. Leora spun around. Someone else had entered. A tall shadow moved between the shelves, slow and deliberate. And Leora's blood ran cold as she recognized the footsteps. Dren. Dren stepped into the library with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him everything. His eyes swept across the glowing shelves, the breathing walls, the impossible vastness of the space, and instead of wonder, his face twisted with hunger. So the rumors were true, he muttered, his voice echoing. A library of power, hidden from those too weak to seek it. He did not see Leora, hidden behind a tall shelf, clutching her book to her chest. The keeper materialized before him, its form more solid now, almost threatening. You are not called, Dren. Leave this place before the library decides you are unworthy. Dren laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Unworthy? I am the headman of this village. I control land, wealth, people. I deserve the knowledge kept here more than anyone. The keeper's voice grew cold. The library does not care for titles or gold. It cares only for the truth of the soul. Yours is hollow. But Dren was already moving, ignoring the warning. His eyes locked onto a shelf in the corner where one book stood out from the rest. A volume bound in black leather, its cover embossed with silver symbols that seemed to writhe and shift. The book called to him, whispering promises of power, control, dominion over all who had ever dared question him. He reached for it. No, the keeper shouted, but it was too late. Dren's fingers closed around the spine, and the book opened in his hands with a sound like a scream. The black book's pages were not paper. They were shadows, dark and shifting, filled with words written in ink that seemed to drip like blood. Dren stared at the first page, his eyes widening as he read. The book promised him everything he craved. The wisdom to rule all hearts, it whispered in his mind. The power to bend wills, to silence opposition, to become unchallengeable. His hands trembled not with fear, but with greed. Yes, he breathed. This is what I deserve. The keeper's voice rang out, desperate now. That book feeds on envy and pride. It will consume you, Dren. Close it before But Drin was already reading aloud, his voice growing louder with each word. I claim the power written here. I claim dominion over truth itself. The library shuddered. Shelves groaned and twisted. The warm golden light flickered and dimmed, replaced by creeping shadows that stretched like grasping hands. Books began to fall from shelves, their pages fluttering in distress. Leora pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. She watched as the black book's ink began to crawl up Drin's hands, staining his skin, spreading like veins of darkness up his arms. He did not notice. He was too entranced by the power he believed he now held. The library was screaming in silence. And Leora realized with growing horror, Drin's presence was poisoning this place. The magic was breaking. Leora's book grew warm in her hands, pulling her attention back to its pages. New words appeared, glowing urgently. The girl discovered she was not alone in her journey. Another had entered her story, a man whose heart was a locked chest, filled with shadows instead of light. Leora read on, her voice barely a whisper. This man sought to steal the magic that was never meant for him. But magic, true magic, cannot be stolen. It can only be given or earned. When greed tries to take what love creates, the world itself begins to break. As she read, the library responded. The shelves around her began to shift and rearrange, creating new pathways, closing off others. Books flew from their places, swirling through the air like a flock of startled birds. The stone floor cracked beneath her feet. Leora looked up and saw scenes forming in the air around her. Images pulled from her own life, projected like memories made solid. She saw herself as a small child, crying over her parents' graves. She saw Marta's cruel face sneering down at her. She saw the village square where books burned. But she also saw moments of kindness. A stranger who once shared bread with her, a child who smiled at her in passing, the warmth of candlelight on the pages she loved. The book was showing her the truth of her own heart, and she realized this was the test. The story was not just about her. It was about choosing what kind of person she would become. The words in Leora's book shifted again, faster now, more urgent. The girl's path crossed with the Shadow Man's, and in that meeting, both would be tested, one by compassion, the other by consequence. Leora's hands tightened on the book. She understood now. This story was not just reflecting her life. It was predicting it, showing her choices she had not yet made. A new line appeared, glowing red like a warning. A liar enters your tale. And when truth and lies collide, one will be consumed. Leora's breath caught. The liar. It had to be Drin. She stepped out from behind a shelf, her small figure dwarfed by the chaos swirling around the library. Drin stood in the center of the room, the black book clutched in his hands, his arms now completely covered in crawling ink. His eyes had changed. They glowed with an unnatural light, hungry and hollow. He turned and saw her, and a twisted smile spread across his face. "The orphan girl," he said, his voice distorted, layered with echoes. "Still clinging to your foolish dreams? Still believing stories have power?" Leora held her book protectively. "They do have power, but not the kind you think." Drin laughed. "Then let me show you what real power looks like." He raised the black book high. "I control this place now, and I will rewrite every story here, including yours." The library convulsed. Shelves twisted violently, books screamed as their pages tore, and the air grew thick and suffocating. The warm golden light was almost completely gone now, replaced by cold shadows that seemed to have weight and hunger. The keeper's form flickered, growing faint. "The balance is breaking," it whispered, its voice barely audible over the chaos. When a corrupted heart reads from the Book of Shadows, the library itself begins to die. Leora's own book pulsed desperately in her hands, its pages flipping wildly as if searching for an answer, a solution, a way to fight back. Words appeared in frantic bursts. The library's senses conflict. Light and shadow cannot coexist. One must yield, or both will fall. Drin advanced toward Leora, his movements jerky and unnatural, as if the ink crawling across his skin was puppeteering him. Give me your book, child. I want to see what pathetic little story chose you. No, Leora said, her voice trembling but firm. This book chose me because I seek truth. Yours chose you because you seek power. We're not the same. Dren's face twisted with rage. Truth is weak. Truth is for fools who have nothing else. I will have everything. He lunged forward and tore a page from Leora's book. The sound was like a scream and a sob combined. The page fluttered to the ground, its golden light dying. Leora fell to her knees, clutching the damaged book, tears streaming down her face. No, please. The moment Dren tore the page, the library's reaction was immediate and catastrophic. Every book on every shelf flew open simultaneously, their pages ripping free and filling the air like a blizzard of paper and ink. Words swirled around them, forming tornadoes of text, sentences colliding and breaking apart. The keeper let out a sound that was not quite human, a wail of anguish that shook the walls. You have broken the sacred law. The keeper's voice thundered, suddenly powerful and terrifying. No story may be torn by greed. The library will defend itself. The floor beneath Dren's feet began to crack, and from those cracks, hands made of shadow reached up, grasping at his legs. He stumbled back, his confidence finally wavering. What is this? The keeper's form solidified, growing larger, more terrible. The library is not a place, fool. It is a living thing, and you have wounded it. Books flew at Dren like weapons, their covers slamming into him, their pages wrapping around his arms and face. He screamed, swinging wildly, but more kept coming. The black book in his hands began to smoke, its pages curling inward. Meanwhile, Leora clutched her wounded book, watching in horror and fascination. The torn page on the ground glowed faintly, and words appeared on it. Every story can be healed, but the cost is always sacrifice. Choose, save the library, or save yourself. Leora looked up at the chaos, at Dren being consumed by the very magic he tried to steal, at the keeper fading like smoke. And she made her choice. Leora's book fell open to a new page, and this time, the words were an offer and a warning combined. You may save him, the man whose greed poisons this place. But the cost will be your story. The book that chose you will close forever. You will forget the magic, forget this night, and return to your ordinary life. Or you may let justice take its course, and the library will survive, but a soul will be lost forever. Choose quickly. Dawn approaches. Leora's hand shook as she read. Save Dren? The man who burned books, who mocked her, who tried to destroy everything she held sacred. Every logical part of her screamed to let him face his consequences. But something deeper stirred in her chest, a memory of her own loneliness, of being judged and cast aside, of how cruelty breeds more cruelty unless someone chooses differently. She looked at Dren, now covered in shadow hands and drowning in torn pages, his face twisted in terror. He was horrible, yes, but he was also a person who had let fear and envy consume him until there was nothing left but darkness. I choose to save him, Leora whispered. The library fell silent. Every flying page froze midair. The keeper's voice, faint but shocked, echoed through the space. Why? Leora's tears fell onto her book's pages. Because someone has to choose mercy. Because if I let him die, I become what he feared, someone who uses power to destroy. She raised her voice, reading from her book. Let truth free the heart that feared it. The moment Leora spoke those words, light exploded from her book. Not the warm golden glow from before, but something brighter, purer, almost blinding. The light washed over the library like a wave, dissolving the shadow hands that clutched at Dren, evaporating the black ink that had crawled across his skin. The tornado of pages settled, gently floating back to their shelves. The cracks in the floor sealed themselves. Dren collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, the black book falling from his hands. It hit the ground and immediately began to dissolve, its pages turning to ash and smoke, until nothing remained but a dark stain on the stone floor. The library exhaled. Shells stopped twisting. The warm golden light returned, softer now, almost gentle. The keeper's form solidified once more, though it looked weary, faded. "The library is saved," the keeper said quietly. "But at what cost?" Leora looked down at her own book. The pages were blank now, completely empty except for one line written in fading gold. The story is hers now, and she chose well. As she watched, even that line disappeared, and the book grew cold and still in her hands. No longer alive, just an ordinary object. Tears streamed down Leora's face. She had saved the library in Dren, but she had lost the magic. Lost the story that had chosen her. Lost the only friend she had ever truly known. Dren slowly lifted his head, his eyes no longer glowing, just human again, tired, confused, and for the first time in years afraid. He looked at Leora, at the girl he had dismissed as worthless, and saw what she had done. You saved me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Why?" Leora's voice was soft but steady. "Because someone had to break the cycle. You were cruel because you were afraid. And if I'd been cruel back, the fear would just continue." Dren stared at his hands, now clean of ink, but trembling. "I wanted power because I felt powerless. I wanted control because I was terrified of what I couldn't understand. Books, stories, imagination, they reminded me that there were things greater than me, things I could never own or command." He looked up at her, and for the first time, his eyes held something other than arrogance. "Shame. I destroyed what I should have protected. And you protected what I tried to destroy." The keeper approached them both, its form flickering like a candle in wind. "The library's magic is fading. Dawn comes. You both must leave, and when you do, you will remember only pieces of this night, like a dream half forgotten." Leora clutched the now ordinary book. "Will I ever come back?" The keeper's voice was gentle. "The library opens for those who need it. Perhaps, when your heart calls again, the door will appear. But for now, your story continues in the waking world." The glass door began to glow, signaling that their time was ending. But before they could move toward it, the keeper raised one hand. "Wait, there's one more thing." The keeper approached Leora and placed a translucent hand on her chest, directly over her heart. Warmth spread through her body, and words appeared in the air around her, glowing softly. Courage, compassion, choice. "These three things you have proven tonight," the keeper said. "The book you held may be silent now, but its lesson is written in you forever. You're a keeper of stories now, Leora. Not because you read them, but because you lived one worth telling." The keeper turned to Dren. "And you, who sought to rule through fear, the library has shown you the truth. Power without wisdom is just destruction. Will you remember this lesson when the sun rises?" Dren bowed his head, something he had never done before. "I will try. I swear it." The keeper nodded slowly. "Then go. Both of you. Live the stories you have learned." The glass door swung open, revealing the forest beyond, now touched with the first pale light of dawn. Leora and Dren walked toward it, stepping through together. An orphan girl and a broken man, both changed by the truths they had faced. As they crossed the threshold, the library began to dissolve behind them, fading like mist in morning light. And in the final moment before it vanished completely, Leora heard the keeper's voice one last time. "Thank you, child, for choosing mercy." Leora woke lying in the grass at the edge of the woods, sunlight warm on her face. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure if she had dreamed the entire night. But clutched in her hands was a book, plain, ordinary, but still warm to the touch. She opened it. Inside, only one page remained with writing. Her name, written in gold that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. Leora, keeper of stories. Beside her, Dren stirred and sat up slowly. He looked around, confusion and fragments of memory playing across his face. He saw Leora, saw the book in her hands, and something clicked. "The library," he whispered. "It was real." Leora nodded. "It was real, and you were given a choice to change." Dren stood slowly, brushing dirt from his clothes. His face was different now. Humbler, uncertain, but not cruel. "I remember pieces. Shadows. My own greed, trying to consume me. And you saved me when you had every reason not to. He looked at her directly. I do not deserve forgiveness. But if you will allow it, I will spend my days proving I learned something from this night. Leora stood as well. Then start today. Let people read again. Let stories return to the village. Dren nodded slowly. I will. And for the first time, Leora believed him. They walked back to the village together as dawn broke fully over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A new day, a new story beginning. In the weeks that followed, the village began to change. Slowly at first, like a plant too long in shadow, finally receiving light. Dren, true to his word, publicly revoked his ban on books and stories. He stood in the village square, the same place where he had once burned precious volumes, and spoke to the gathered crowd. I was wrong, he said, his voice carrying across the silent assembly. I burned books because I feared what I could not control. But knowledge is not the enemy. Ignorance is. He gestured to Leora, who stood nervously at the edge of the crowd. This girl taught me something I had forgotten, that stories do not make us weak. They make us human. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some were skeptical, others hopeful. But everyone watched as Dren personally rebuilt the village's small library, clearing out an abandoned building and inviting anyone with books to donate them. Leora spent her days there, reading aloud to children who gathered on the floor, their eyes wide with wonder. She read them tales of bravery, kindness, and second chances. She taught them that words were powerful not because they could command others, but because they could open hearts. The children loved her. Parents who once avoided her began to thank her. And slowly, joy returned to the village, a joy that had been missing for far too long. Months passed. The village library grew, filled with donated books and handwritten stories contributed by villagers themselves. Leora, now 13, had become the unofficial keeper of this place, and she wore the title with quiet pride. She still lived in the attic above the bakery, but Marta's cruelty had softened. Whether from shame or genuine change, Leora wasn't sure, but she accepted it. One afternoon, a traveling merchant passed through the village and stopped at the library. He browsed the shelves, and his eyes fell upon a single volume tucked in the corner, a book with a plain cover and no title. Curious, he pulled it out and opened it. The pages were blank except for one glowing sentence that appeared as he read, "Let me out." The merchant frowned and turned the page. More words appeared, desperate and frantic. "I am trapped. Please, someone read my story. Let me out." He slammed the book shut, disturbed, and quickly left. That night, the book sat on its shelf, whispering into the darkness. Inside its pages, Dren's worst fears and deepest regrets had been captured, a shadow of the man he had almost become, preserved forever as a warning. Somewhere in the night wind, a voice echoed faintly, full of desperate longing. But no one heard it. No one came, and the book remained closed. Years passed. Leora grew into a young woman, no longer the hollow-cheeked orphan, but someone strong, confident, and deeply kind. She never forgot the midnight library, though her memories of that night were hazy, like a dream remembered in fragments. Sometimes she would wake with her heart racing, recalling golden light and breathing shelves and a voice that said, "You are a keeper of stories now." The village had transformed completely. Children grew up reading. Adults gathered in the evenings to share tales. Even the elderly, who had lived through the dark years of Dren's book burnings, found joy in rediscovering old stories they thought were lost forever. Dren himself had aged considerably, his once proud bearing now bent with the weight of humility. He spent his final years in quiet service, never seeking power or recognition again. On his deathbed, he called for Leora. She came, holding his frail hand as he whispered his last words. "Thank you," he said, tears in his fading eyes, "for showing me there was another way, for choosing mercy when I deserved justice." Leora squeezed his hand gently. Every story deserves a chance to be rewritten. Dren smiled and closed his eyes for the last time. And the village mourned not for the tyrant he had been, but for the man he had become. proof that even the darkest heart could find light if given grace. One evening, many years later, Leora was closing the library when a child approached her. A small girl with wild curls and curious eyes, no older than Leora had been when she first found the glowing page. "Miss Leora," the girl said shyly, holding out a torn piece of paper. "I found this in the field. It's glowing." Leora's breath caught. She took the page carefully, and her hands trembled as she recognized it immediately. The paper was warm, pulsing with soft golden light, and words appeared across its surface. "The library opens for those who seek the truth." Below that, new words formed. "Will you answer the call, keeper of stories? Another soul needs guidance." Leora looked down at the child, whose eyes were wide with wonder and fear. She remembered that feeling, the mixture of terror and hope, of not understanding but desperately wanting to believe. "What does it mean?" the child whispered. Leora knelt down to the girl's level and smiled gently. "It means you have been chosen, and tonight, when the moon is full, you will follow the wind to a place where stories are alive." The child's eyes grew even wider. "Will you come with me?" Leora thought of the midnight library, of the keeper, of the book that had once chosen her, and she realized her story was not over. It had simply been waiting for the next chapter. "Yes," Leora said, "I will come with you." That night, under a full moon, Leora and the child walked together to the edge of the woods. The silvery wind rose to greet them, wrapping around them like an old friend welcoming them home. And there, between the ancient oak trees, the glass door appeared once more, glowing softly, pulsing with invitation. The child reached for Leora's hand, squeezing tight. "I'm scared." Leora smiled. "So was I. But fear is just a story we tell ourselves before we know the ending. Come, let me show you something magical." They stepped through together, and the midnight library opened before them. Shelves breathing, books humming, the air filled with the scent of rain and ink and infinite possibility. The keeper appeared, its form solid and familiar, and though Leora could not see its face, she felt its smile. "Welcome back, Keeper Stories," the keeper said warmly. "You have done well. The village remembers how to dream again." Leora bowed respectfully. "I only did what you taught me, chose truth over power, mercy over revenge." The keeper gestured toward the shelves. "And now another has been called. Will you guide her as I once guided you?" Leora looked at the trembling child beside her and nodded. "I will." A book flew from a distant shelf, its cover shimmering with rainbow light, and landed gently in the child's small hands. Her eyes went wide with wonder as it opened, revealing her own reflection on the first page. "Every story begins with a truth you've denied," Leora whispered, repeating the words she had once read herself. The child looked up at her, no longer afraid, and smiled. As dawn approached hours later, Leora and the child emerged from the woods. The library dissolved behind them like morning mist, leaving only a single page lying in the grass. On it, written in gold that caught the first rays of sunlight, were the words, "The girl who read the truth." Leora picked it up and added it to the others she had collected over the years. Pages that appeared mysteriously, each telling the story of someone who had entered the midnight library and been forever changed. She placed this new page carefully in a special book she kept locked in the village library, a book that would one day be passed to the next keeper, and the next, ensuring that the stories would never be forgotten. As she walked home through the awakening village, children waved to her from windows, and she waved back. The sun rose golden over the rooftops, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. Leora thought of the keeper's final words before they left. "The stories we choose to tell, and those we dare to read, become the mirrors of who we truly are." She smiled, touching the warm page in her pocket. The library would open again when it was needed, and she would be ready. The story we seek will always reveal who we truly are. If this tale touched your heart, comment truth below. Because every person who has ever felt small, overlooked, or told they don't matter carries within them a story worth reading. Hit subscribe and share this with someone who needs to remember that their story has power. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and let's build a community of story keepers. People who believe that words can heal, that mercy can change hearts, and that even in the darkest night, a library of light is waiting to choose you.